I didn't become an artist, I was born one. I became an activist in my teens. In 2016, I combined the two, and now I'm an artivist. My mother always told me I was born with a crayon in my hand, and that from the earliest age, she could sit me down somewhere with a crayon and a piece of paper and I would never move.
When other kids were playing with dolls, I was making things with Play-Doh.
That's the way I understand the world. I mean, my earliest recollections of seeing a pattern on a blue wall, and what I came later to learn from my mother was my nursery before I was 3.
I have lived in Vermont since 1965. I came from New York City, where I went to college, Pratt Institute. I have been painting my whole life.
Since kindergarten. I have framed kindergarten pictures hanging on my studio right now. So I've always been doing this. I started taking painting lessons when I was 6 years old, and I had my first regional show when I was 12.
I'm originally from the Netherlands, and I have been an artist, I guess, most of my life, next to many other things, but that was what I was drawn to.
I started doing watercolors on trips in my 20s, but I didn't really start in earnest until I came to Vermont in 1968. I took a teaching job and stopped commuting, and that allowed more time to do art that was kind of bubbling up before that. So I guess, 1968 was really when I started in earnest.
When I moved to Vermont, that's when I started being a professional painter.
I remember in elementary school, my art teacher talking to my mother about me and my images, and it's just been a part of me for my whole life.
And then I can remember as a very, very, very young child and looking up at trees that were going overhead, and I'm assuming I was in a stroller or something, and just the shapes going by me.
I was maybe 5 years old when she bought me a set of oil paints. I mean, that was a big deal then, when all those years ago, and little canvases, and I was allowed to paint right on my bedroom floor. It was a hardwood floor, and there was no fuss about, oh, here, put this down, don't make a mess. I just did it.
And I distinctly remember when I was a really little child at a shoe store that my mother got my shoes, they had a drawing contest, coloring, and I won. It was in the window, and I can't remember what I won, but that's from a long time ago.
I really think it was a birthright.
I'm a potter for almost 60 years. My main form of work is collage painting.
Sculpture. Then out of sculpture grew puppets, because they were living sculptures. And I've always painted next to it.
I have always sort of exercised my skills by drawing from life. I've always kept up a sketchbook so that I draw from my imagination every day. And so I had all of these things that I do. So my work is quite varied. If you look at it across the board, there are portraits that look like people, and there are paintings that look like they're some geometry exercise and space, So that's basically, what I do.
I feel just as comfortable with watercolors as I do with a piece of aluminum. I mean, they're all the same thing. I encourage people to reach out and learn as much as they can. That's what makes art interesting. The more skills you have, the more ability you have to express yourself through different mediums, because not everything can be expressed in glass or pencil or pen or ink or stone or iron or whatever. So I'm always looking for something new. It just makes it more interesting.
I've spent the last 10 years changing from a production potter who did high-fire porcelain to being a hand builder who does electric firing. And that whole 10 years I spent sort of going on this journey to here. So
I have a ground before me, whether it's a piece of paper or a canvas, and I'm looking at the world. And I'm beginning to lay the pencil or the brush or the pen onto the ground and to understand that shape. There are times, and it doesn't happen all the time, but there are times when I put the pencil to the ground and I begin to draw, and I feel that in some ineffable way, I'm reaching into space and touching that which I'm drawing. And that distance between the experience of I and the experience of thou, of the other, breaks down. And that paper or that canvas is the boundary between my experience as a person, as an artist, and the world that I'm trying to understand.
You know, when you're making art, you're in a different space and time frame. And for me, it's just, I'd rather be there than dealing with what's going on around me.
Well, we just have this human urge to do it. I can't really explain it. But you go way back to the cave paintings. Why did they do it? It's not like they had a lot of spare time. And yet they created this art, and it's been just an unbroken chain since then. And I can't explain why. It's just something you have to do. Someone once said, if you don't do it, you get sick.
I'm driven. It's just that I spend all of my time in the studio, so I'm just sort of driven to make these things. And I do it in little sort of segments, one kiln load at a time, and I usually enter that. I'm inspired by something, I've done drawings, and I have an idea, and so I set to it. But as I go along, things change and things happen, and it usually is, the finish is not what I set out doing.
I usually start with my non-dominant hand just to throw me outside of my skill levels so that I'm not relying on that so much.
It's just a joy to be able to get inside that experience of creating.
To have a reason to get up in the morning, a studio or a workshop to go to and make things.
Self-determination. The ability to lead your life the way you want to lead it, and without anybody telling you what to do. There's nothing better.
It's to keep me sane. It is a part of me that you cannot deny. You have to be doing it.
And it could supply a little sense of adventure, breaking out into new areas that I haven't explored before. That could be exciting.
I'm gonna get up and do it. And bad days are days I'm scheduled for other things and I can't do it.
it's given me a way to cope with things. For example, 10 years ago when my wife died, that kicked off a whole series of artworks related to her death. Some very angry sculptures that smashed and destroyed things, but also some things commemorating her life, like memorial plaques and a headstone. And that helped me get through that period.
It's part of my philosophy that the best way to look at something is to live with it. And if I want my paintings to have any life, they have to be looked at, but not by me. I already looked at them a lot, but by other people who bring their artistic sentiments to it. And that's very important, I think, what people see and how they interpret art that they live with.
That would be a picture of my late wife at Montauk Point on the beach. And she's barefoot in shorts and holding a parasol. That would be my favorite. I have it hanging in my bedroom where I see it every day.
My own personal work is pretty much centered around political and social commentary with a kind of a cartoon style that I've developed over the years. So inspiration comes from current events.
What inspires me is memory. My own personal memory, but art history memory. The history that I experienced growing up, being born in 1942, I find that things that have happened during my lifetime, especially my younger years up to around 20, became iconic images that I love to work with. So you'll see a lot of my work is representative of history that's occurred during my lifetime.
Inspiration changes over time as we get older, but basically, as an artist, I think, which I had to call myself finally, even though I resented it, as an artist, I feel we are insatiable. We always look, at least I always look for something that surprises me, something I don't know, but that I like. And I don't know why. And that brings you to many, many things, many strange, but also exciting.
As far as inspiration, I don't know, everything is fabulous as far as I'm seeing, looking around, and it's just great, very inspiring. And if all else fails, I have 50 years of sketchbooks where I have sketched pots and things, and then if I flip through there, I'll recognize an inspiration and I'm off and running. So I don't have much trouble finding inspiration.
When I see something that's wrong, that I might be an activist and protest about or write letters or something, some people do that. I don't. I make a painting. So I deal with what's wrong. That's my inspiration.
I'm always reluctant to use the word inspiration.
I believe that everybody has a creative spirit. We both have two sides to our brain, and the creative side is a very active side. And I think it's very important that we exercise that part of our brain. So I do. I draw daily, and I get my inspiration from some mysterious place. I could not tell you where it comes from, it just comes.
In Genesis, it says that the world was tohu abohu, which without form and void. and that the Spirit moved upon the face of the waters. And out of this tohu abohu came light and life. That's the artist's path of creativity. You really are a co-creator. And to enter into that, when I'm working intently, whether I'm working abstractly or I'm working and trying to understand something that's right there in front of me, or if I'm photographing another person, I always feel that creative process is an expression not of my ego superimposed upon the world, nor is it the presentation of that which I am looking at, because that's other from me. But the mystery of art is always finding itself emerging on the boundary between the artist and the world, or the abstract, the concept that the artist is working with. And that's the definition of mystery.
I love being in Randolph. I love being on Main Street. People I've never met before will come in and sit down at the table I'm working at and take out their work and start working at it. Now that's really nice. Moving into the storefront was what changed the whole deal for me. I once had a dream about it, probably at least 25, 30 years ago, that I was working on Main Street, but not where I am. I was working where the Northfield Bank is, on that corner, and those big windows there. And kind of, I was the window display. And then when Randolph collapsed and emptied out a few years ago, and this whole Main Street was dark, and John came to me and said, I thought of something we could do that would brighten Main Street. We can rent a place, and you can hang your art in there like a gallery, and we can leave the lights on 24 hours a day. And that's how I got there. It wasn't about working there. It took me 2 years to finally move down and work in there. So it's like a dream come true.
A theme.
The common thread is that I'm anxious for my ego to take a hike when I'm in the studio. I find that judgment is very dangerous for my work. It was very hard for me when I was first starting out to get rid of the teachers' voices, the public voices, the market voices. So I worked very hard to get those influences out of my studio. And then I realized I had to leave too, on some level. That's when I started dazzing. I started using a pendulum to direct my actions on the canvas. And then ultimately the pendulum said it wouldn't work with me anymore, so I had to be on my own.
Well, it goes back to that social and political commentary. I mean, I'm very interested in current events and very interested in what's going on in the world and very interested in politics and social issues. And so I'm constantly in my mind when I'm listening and following the news, creating images based on what I hear. They just kind of spring out of the conversation. It's like cathartic reaction to what's going around in the news, and it's my way of dealing with it.
As an artist, I just really had to do something without being arrogant. I had to find a humility, a road in which I could address these issues that are very meaningful to me. And the Reparation series is my first, I would say, successful step in that direction. The condition of Black and brown Americans as an artist is not an easy feat, especially as a white person who is privileged, is part and parcel of the conditions that we live in right now, and that we're dealing with the inequities that still persist. When I was in my 20s, I did a lot of civil rights work. the sit-ins. So I got an initial experience of civil rights, and that has come into my work recently, thank goodness. I.e. the reparation series is in this show.
This work that I brought is from my COVID notebooks, and I started the day by taking 8 random words from my email because I have been very distressed by the changes in our country, and I have been very upset by what I am understanding the direction the country was going in, and I wanted to do something that was in touch with that, but it was also personal. And so I took these 8 words, and I had this little discipline that I was going to use these 8 words in a sentence or a poem or a question. I like asking questions too. And I had a little rule that I had to use the same tense as if it was a verb, I had to use the same tense. If it was plural, I had to use plural. But other than that, I had to use, and I could use more than one sentence if I needed to. So that started the inspiration, but the painting is not an illustration of the words. Sometimes the paintings came first, sometimes they came afterwards. And never did I try to match them up. I let them match up by date only.
Well, there's a thread that runs through a lot of it, but much of it is outside that thread. I think the thread you're talking about is mathematics and geometry. I started doing geometric art when I started teaching math at Vermont Tech back in 1968, and I'm still doing it, and my pieces in this show are geometric. And many of my works are geometric or mathematical. Others are based on celestial themes, which is sort of related to the mathematics. But a lot are completely different. Landscapes and seascapes and trees and animals and people. Portraits, self-portraits. Portraits of my family and friends. Topics that have nothing to do with mathematics.
The 4 pieces that I brought to the show were very playfully done. The first is very much a little bit, if you look at it, it's just the word love. Almost done in a pop art fashion, I guess. I was using colored pencils, and I started using colored pencils with great passion when I was a student at Divinity School. And so, but I rediscovered them, and I used Prismacolor, so there's like 160 different colors. It's not as infinite a spectrum as you have when you're working with paints, but you can blend those colors too. So you have quite a range on the palette. I read a poem by George Herbert, Love Bade Me Welcome. And it's a story, in this poem we get the understanding that for this experience this man had was that he didn't feel deserving of love. And yet love wooed him into life. And that's my story, to be wooed into life. And so I feel that I saw that, I contemplated that poem, and that expression of love is freely done. It looks like it's carefully measured, but it's just freehandly done. I didn't use even very many straight edges, but I didn't use any measuring devices. And you feel love drawing you in, I think. It's a very simple piece. It's a little bit like the 19th century art that we used to see on the walls in farmhouses, home sweet home, whatever. But it's very simple, but it's exploring something that's profoundly mysterious. And then the other things that I have in the show are experiments, really. The last one that I did was that exploration of a more perfect union. How do we relate as a people, one to another, particularly in the United States right now? Some people only vote Republican and some people only vote Democrat. But we're not just Republicans and Democrats. Vermont, which is now a majority Democratic state, there are a lot of Republicans among us, and I love them all that I know. And none of them think the way I do, but none of the Democrats that I know think the way I do either. And we all think about things other than politics as well, and we all have different perceptions on that. I don't know what it feels like for anybody else to feel the inside of the roof of their mouth, their palate with their tongue. Most of us have palates. Most of us have tongues. And so we assume that we know what it's like to experience that for another person, but we don't. If I can't understand something that simple, what a grape tastes like, for another person, how can I assume that I know what it's like to be inside another person's skin, another person's experience? And so to come together, it's a mystery to me that we can ever come together with anybody, because we truly are islands of experience in space-time. It's the exploration of that overlap that a more perfect union explores. If you look carefully at that abstract piece, which is technically, it's not very difficult. And if anybody looks at that and says, I could do that, I agree. Because it's not a technical endeavor. It's an attempt to explore a thought, not an attempt to create something for anyone to look at. So the art that's on the wall, which is beautifully framed by Sherry Vogel at Corner Frame Shop, is an expression of thought, my thought. All the colors of the rainbow, all overlapping, creating a hodgepodge, and you'd think it would be a mess. But when I was done with it, I looked at it and I thought, it's not a mess. There's a beauty there that emerges in the chance interaction. And it's, for me, a visual incarnation of the mystery of American society. We have all kinds of individuals and groups and organizations and people who get together to form this multidimensional unity that we call America. And anybody who says they know what's right, what's absolutely right in this grand experiment that we're about, is either a liar or a fool. But I'd like to think they could still be my friend.
I've done 3 kiln loads, collecting some work for the show. But as usual, each kiln load I'm quite happy, and then I do another, I'm not quite happy. And today, the bell rang, I unloaded it, and I had to deliver them. And it was really wonderful. It was like it was better than I hoped it would be at the time I started it. So.
There's definitely a thread through my work. For my whole life, I focus on the human figure, working with emotions, trying to create emotions that will come up into the viewer. My particular pieces that I put in this show, that certain age of your life where your body is just perfect, and I'm working with emotions of passion, maybe, something like that.
I have one piece out here that's really exciting for me, because I've been working on it for 20 years, and that kind of puts it into context. I have a glass window out there that is a collection of pieces of glass that some of them are over 150 years old. I've been collecting it for 45 years. I had a great uncle who collected it in the 20s and 30s, doing the same thing I'm doing, stained glass restoration. And I had all these tiny little pieces of glass that weren't good for anything. So rather than see them get thrown away, I started letting them into separate panels years ago. And now I have 50 of these done. And this is the first time I've been able to show any of them, so it's kind of fun. It's very exciting to do that. See something that you've been working on for so many years and bring it out of the closet for the first time. Yeah, that's neat.
And only after a few years, you know what is worth saving. And I work endlessly at my age. There's three categories: it's okay, it's good, and then the third is where it had just happened. And those you usually keep. The other ones, they go back in the shop.
The thing I've discovered about aging is that the liminal shelf is a bitch. And the liminal shelf is that point when you're approaching the dark hole, the black hole in space, or when you're approaching the edge of a waterfall, which is easier to understand, and you realize that you are suddenly in the vortex of the waterfall. And you may not have gone over the edge, but you are already falling. Even though you're still going along in the river, you're already falling because you can't get out. And I do believe that the poet who says, "Go not gentle into that good night, but rage, rage against the dying of the light," I agree with that. And so I'll fight as hard as I can. But my fight is not to get out of the vortex. My fight is to understand as much of the blessed mystery as I can before I'm absorbed by it.
I'm looking forward to using art again to help me get through the aging process. Which is, again, a little hard to cope with. And I don't think I would try to do it without having art as an aid.
I don't feel like any age. And I have friends from as young as you can imagine to way older than I am. And it's never been about age.
I guess if you're, still kicking at this age, then you've aged well. The flexibility to be able to make art throughout your life is it's just a joy. It really is. I feel very lucky in that respect.
You make connections over a long period of time. And also the connections are a mystery to me.
Well, I died about 9 or 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I don't know, from wasp stings, an anaphylactic reaction. I was pronounced dead. So I know. And that was how I felt when I was dead. I thought, this is the coolest thing, because now I know. I know that it's painless, and it's easy, and it's comfortable. And there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of.
Hopefully some people will still remember my name. Otherwise, I'll have to keep stirring the pot.
I was asked to join this show because I'm old enough.
Just keep on doing it, because you're never going to run out of ideas. You're never going to stop developing your voice.
We're like, all of us, like motes of dust raised from the floor of a barn for a brief time, floating in the grand cathedral-like space of the barn. And someone walks into the barn and from another realm. They're not a mote of dust, they're probably a higher dimensional being, but they walk into the barn and they see a shaft of light coming from a space way high up in the barn, down through the clear story of the barn to the floor. And the only reason why you can see that shaft of light is because of all the dust that's in the air, the motes of dust that are reflected and refracting and celebrating and discovering that light among each other. That's what we do. I'm reflecting with my art. And that's what I think everybody's doing. But there comes a time when we fall back to the floor. The dust falls back to the floor, and we will return from whence we came. But for a brief time, boy, what a kick to be here, to be able to look at, Phil Gaudenschwager's work, and to see Reishi's work again, and Paul Coulter's work. It's so wonderful to be here and to be able to celebrate life. That's what you'll see here. A whole lot of people who are ageless in my eyes, just young kids playing with materials in their own unique and wonderful and mysterious way.